Good morning.
Morning.
How are we all doing? Are you stressed? Yes, I hear you.
Not really.
Not really? Well, that's good. It is okay to feel the crunch right now. We would be feeling that if we were in school or out of school. It's just a crunchy time of year, but please feel free to reach out if you feel you need to chat more about adjusting some deadlines or getting some help with things. Please feel free to do that. You guys are managing great from my perspective, but I just want to make sure you know that I am available to talk you off the ledge. You may have noticed some marks popped up in Edsby over the weekend. I had a marking blitz Thursday, Friday, Saturday night. So your essays have been marked for history and for English, actually. Hopefully I don't lose you for the next 5 minutes as you troll through those spots. But feel free to take a peek. I would like you to get your essay back before you maybe engage with me on, hey, how come I got this mark? It's unfortunate that you can't see your essay and my comments and the rubric at the same time as you're seeing your mark. But there's really no way for me to get around that because I want you to have an idea of where you're sitting in the course before your exam. So you'll be able to pick up your essays next Wednesday at the pickup drop-off. And please feel free to ask me anything that is confusing in terms of the comments I may have written there, because it's important for me to know why you got the mark that you did. And that's what a rubric is for, so that we kind of eliminate the mystery and eliminate any subjectivity to, oh, you really like me, that's why I got the mark I did. Or I'm not sure if Mrs. Ong really likes me. And I really like all of you, so can't be that. We got a couple of things to go through today. I want to go through the expectations for your course culminating project or course culminating activity, however you refer to that, your CCA, your CCP. So I'm going to share screen. Andy had asked a question over the internet over the weekend. And because I was having a Mark Fest, I happened to see that and be able to respond to that in some detail, but I'm not sure that all of you had seen that and have had that clarified. So can you see the Edsby screen I'm on right now? Just give me a subtle nod. Thank you. Okay, so Andy had asked, hey, just to be clear, and I appreciate the request for clarity, total of 4 artifacts. So 3 are made, which is World War I artifact, 1920s, 30s as a group, 1 from 1920s or 30s, and 1 from World War II. So that makes a total of 3 actual constructed artifacts. And then your 1 from the Cold War, which is really just this week, is just a plan. So I break that down a little bit further here. So you need an artifact and a typed up significance of that artifact. So if you have playing cards, why were cards significant? Why did you include those? The idea is that this is a time capsule or memory box, something like that. So why would a playing card or a deck be significant to World War I? And you guys have done a great job of mapping out the significance, but you need to type that in a couple of sentences. And that's all it needs to be, really, like 3 sentences on the significance. An artifact for the 20s, 30s, typed up on its significance. Sorry, that should be 20s and 30s. 1 for World War II, as well as the typed up significance to its time. Then you need just a plan from the Cold War typed up on its significance to the time. Okay, so you don't need to spend 3 hours making an artifact. I just want you to have a picture or to tell me, hey, I would like to include this. And then you do need those type 2 to 3 sentences for its significance, which will take you almost no time. So my example for you is, here's a chunk of the Berlin Wall. If I had a rock, I could just go out and get a rock in the backyard, but because I wanted to show you what I am expecting, I just took a picture of something from the internet, and this is part of the Berlin Wall. So then my 2 to 3 sentences, and because I'm an English major and history major, it gets to be 4 to 5. That's okay. So for the Cold War, I could have the picture below and this write-up. So this is the write-up that would include this picture or plan. I've included a piece of the Berlin Wall, which fell November 9th, 1989. Berlin was divided into 4 sections at the end of World War II to try to prevent Germany from rising from the ashes, as they had done so surprisingly after World War I. This division of Berlin created intense hostility and rising paranoia between the East, USSR, and the West. The USSR constructed a wall that cut off East Berlin from the West, and finally in 1989, after 30 years, the wall was smashed by Berliners on both sides. So that's a sample of what is required for your write-up, for all of your artifacts, and then just this plan, okay? It could be a picture, it could be a sticky note with, hey, if we'd had more time, I would have loved to create a button from the the uniform of a Russian soldier. I don't know, something like that. Like if there had been more time, I would have liked to scout out something like this. Simply tell me what you would have liked to do for your plan for the Cold War. Any questions about that? About the expectation for your course culminating project? There is a course culminating project and there is an exam in history. That just means course culminating project is 15%, exam is 15%. If we didn't have a course culminating project, your exam would be 30. And because back in February, things looked really sketchy even then as to if we were actually going to be able to have exams, which is why I built a course culminating project in on the off chance we couldn't have an exam. But I feel like this is best case scenario for you because you've got time, you've had time all semester to polish this and do a great job on your course culminating project. And that lightens the load of your exam, lightens the pressure and the load of that. Questions? I will actually pause now and make sure that I can see everyone. Just feel free to take your microphone off and ask. Okay, no questions. Your course culminating project is due next Wednesday. Okay, so at the last pickup and drop off, which is next Wednesday, the 16th, you need to hand this in. And that I think is across the board for all your courses. Everything that is outstanding, if you haven't been given other dates, will need to be due and handed in by the 16th. Okay. So we will move on then from course culminating to exam. And since we're on EDSB, let's just fly down here to what I had posted about your history exam. You should be getting an email in the next day or two about your exam schedule. Have you gotten an email already? I know Mr. Scouten and Mr. Gilbert were working on that on Friday, but just finishing up some things. Have you got an email? This is yes, this is no. Okay, so I know at this point your English exam, you're writing before your history exam. So you're writing that in the first week. And then those last Monday, Tuesday, like the 21st, 22nd, one of those days will be your history exam, as far as I know. So you've got a little more time to study for history, and I wanted to let you know that this is kind of the breakdown we're looking at for your history exam. So it's going to have 3 styles of questions. I'm just going to go through this and then take your questions at the end. One of the major goals for you as young historians is to be able to see patterns, to compare events and decisions, and to make connections. So throughout the course, we've stopped at times and said, hey, what does this sound like? What does this remind you of? Anyone connecting? Because that is one of the goals, is not to see these eras as separate, unconnected things, but to see how events in the First World War in some way led to the Second World War, because of decisions made at the end there, because of hostilities. So we've talked about that a number of times. So you're going to want to, as you're studying, be thinking about what draws these together, as well as the single and unconnected things. So one of the kinds of questions you'll have will be matching, like you had in your World War I test, like just one column, another column, matching the best things. You may have putting events in chronological order. So in order to study for this kind of question, you need to study the timeframes of major events. And for major events, I've given you a bunch just to get you started. What I want you to know is I'm not going to ask you the Battle of the Somme. When was that date? I'm not going to ask you that. But you're going to need to know that that happened in World War I, not World War II. And you're going to need to know that that happened before armistice, before the 100 days. You have to know the significance of these battles in terms of their order. So other than giving you a bunch of dates like this and then telling you to go back through your notes, that's the best way I can think of for how to study for the first kind of question, which is a matching and putting events in order. And I'm not going to have really tricky ones like, oh, those happened a month apart, except for maybe the 100 days and then armistice. Okay, like you'd have to be able to put in order the 100 days of battle come before the end of World War I. Those sorts of, that would be the only. You also would have to know the invasion of Poland comes before and is really the trigger for the event that starts World War II. So if you have Germany invades Poland and then you have Canada joins World War II, you'd have to get those in the correct chronological order. What I'm not going to do is say start of World War I and you have to give me the date. I'm not going to say invasion of Normandy and you have to give me the date. So you will either have matching or you'll have a list of significant events and you need to put them in chronological order. Any questions about that first part of, or that first kind of question on your exam? Okay, so the next kind of question are just what we would call short answer or single paragraph kinds of questions. So think about topics we've spent some time on in class, such as the government intervention in the Great Depression. We talked about the 20s as being a time of great social changes. What were some big changes happening in fashion, in expectations for women, in mechanization, factory building, those sorts of things. So these are all topics that you could, I think, pretty easily, with some review, write a paragraph about. The influenza, the effects of that, how it traveled, the widespread The comparison between the deaths caused by the Spanish flu and World War I, those sorts of things. Again, you don't have to know exact numbers, but if you do, that will help strengthen if you're making all generalizations and you don't really know, that's going to be significant in these paragraph answers. Okay, we talked about main causes of World War I as being representative of the M, the A, the I, and the N. That could be another paragraph question. How the Treaty of Versailles really caused World War II or led to World War II. Hitler's unquestioned rise to power in the 30s. Canada's treatment of different cultures through the 1914, 1950s. 3 factors that made the depression of the 30s so difficult. So we had talked about there was a drought, there was the way people had handled their money in the 20s, and the buying of stocks on credit, things like that. So those are all single paragraph answers that I feel like we have talked about. They will need some review. It's been a while, but you have that in your notes. I'm not saying that those are the only ones, but I'm saying these are ones that come to my mind as I think back over the course. The last kind of question is an essay question, and there's only one big essay question where during the exam you will need to write an introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. So you need to think about some of the patterns that it would be logical for you to be able to write not just 1 paragraph, but 3. And there are only a few. Okay, if you think about our course, there are only a few topics or patterns that we could write an entire essay about. So here are some examples. So patterns that link World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. What are some things that are similar that you see this happened again? Oh, look like maybe we didn't learn our lesson. Oh, look, it's happening again. And that could be in the way of treaties, alliances, things like that. So you might think along those lines of, we saw that definitely was a domino effect in World War I because of these treaties from the late 1800s that had been signed. Then once one country was invaded, there was this domino of, oh, because of this secret alliance, now you're actually at war with these 4 countries. We saw a little bit of that with World War II. We saw some changing alliances. We're going to see some disintegrating of alliances in what will become known as the Cold War. How each war started, I touched on that a little bit. You could see it as alliances are what started those wars. You could see maybe there were lessons learned by the time we get to the Cold War when you think of those wars. Maybe lessons weren't learned depending on your perspective. When we look at just the world wars, was one world war justified and one was not? So then you might have a paragraph saying one war, like World War II, is justified for these 2 reasons. Then you have 2 paragraphs. And World War I was not justified for these reasons. So that your thesis would be, 1 world war was justified. World War I was, let me start again. Your thesis would read something like, World War I was not justified, but World War II was justified for these 2 reasons. So then you see you've got your 3 paths. World War I was not justified. World War II was justified for these reasons. Okay, you've got your statement and your path. It's a little bit different than what we've set up, which is why I'm walking you through it, but it still allows you to have a thesis that gives you 3 directions and 3 paths to prove. Okay, so that's maybe you could be thinking about as you study, was one world war justified and one was not? you could track Canada's coming of age. So what three, again, thinking of a thesis with three path statements, what three decisions can you point to say this is what made Canada a country so that she could stand on her own and be her own country by the time we get to the 50s? So you would just be looking at three decisive moments, just like in your essay, you did three decisive battles, just three decisive moments that allowed Canada to not just live under the shadow of Britain, but be her own country. You might look at the changing role of women, if that's something that you researched and you're really clear on throughout the 1910s to 1960s. You might look at Canada's treatment of Indigenous peoples throughout time in terms of their ability to be involved in the world wars or residential schools, the Indian Act, you can trace that. So I will give you at least two choices for your essay, just letting you know that. I will not give you one question, and if you are not super clear on that one question, you bomb. Not at all. I really want you to do well, but I really want you to study. So just letting you know, your essay part will have at least two options where you will only need to choose one of them. You're only writing one essay. It's geared for a 2-hour exam, but you have 3 hours. You have, so you have a full 3 hours if you need it, but as I plan this, I'm shooting for it being right around that 2-hour mark. So you will need to budget your time in terms of planning out your essay. And that's why you want to review thinking about these kinds of questions so that when you get your question, which will be something similar to these, and you read your two options, you go, oh, perfect. I studied this and I know it because I've already thought through what I would use to prove that. Okay, same with these. You will have, say, I want you to write 3, you will have probably 5 or 6 different topics and you choose 3. So you'll have at least 5. There will be maybe 5, and I'd ask you to write 3 for your short answer paragraph. So that, again, I want you to study. You need to know a variety of things, but you won't be totally sunk if the couple of suggestions or topics I give you aren't the ones you studied, okay? This will be, there won't be any options here. You'll have the dates, or sorry, you'll have the events that you will have to put in chronological order, or you will have matching, or you might have one of each in terms of the terms. So if we're doing matching, then you'll need to know your terms like blitzkrieg, sitzkrieg, not in terms of knowing them off by heart perfectly, but knowing approximately what those things are, because I will have a matching definition for you. But there are some creeping barrage. There are some terms that we've learned that I'm not going to ask you to define them, but I will potentially have a matching column that you're going to need to know that creeping barrage is different from sitzkrieg. Okay, that's kind of a lot. Do you guys have any questions about your exam? Again, you'll get an email in the next day or two giving you the exact date of that, but I'm pretty sure it happens the 21st or 22nd, and your English exam happens first. First in terms of what I teach you. Questions? Okay, we're going to move right into the Cold War then. So if you could open up your notebooks. Last week on Thursday, you started with a little article that kind of mapped out the Cold War. You watched a short clip. So I would like you to find the Berlin blockade and then these colored maps. We're going to need those for this seminar. So just a little reminder as we get started, we have, as historians, looked back and grouped these decades and grouped these times. But remember, the people living at the time didn't know they were living in the Cold War. It wasn't called the Cold War popularly until a couple years in. Remember, a lot of soldiers, 1945, are just trying to get home. Just trying to get home from Europe, from prisoner of war camps in Germany. So they're not really interested in the politics that's happening between the superpowers that have emerged at the end of World War II. That's not getting as much coverage in news as getting troops home, rebuilding the home front, where are women going who've been really sustaining the factories and doing all that needed to be done to get supplies for the war effort. So there's a lot of that. That's on the minds of people, grieving the losses of the injured coming back or their loved ones not coming back at all at the end of World War II. So as much as we call it kind of the Cold War from the end of World War II, they didn't know that. They didn't know it at the time that it was going to lead into this potential World War III. There would be superpowers posturing and standing off. They didn't know that. So I do want to just remind us that we attach these labels to make it make sense in our head later, but it wasn't labeled the Cold War until really a couple years in terms of widely being called that. So the term Cold War comes from George Orwell. So you read Animal Farm last year. He also wrote 1984, which is a really interesting futuristic kind of book that he wrote during this time, really about these superpowers posturing. So he coins the term in 1945, just in a newspaper article that he published about this nuclear stalemate that he sees is going to be a major problem between these superpowers. Okay, so he was always ahead of the curve in terms of thinking about what does this mean and kind of seeing the writing on the wall. He was just really ahead of his time in what he forecasted. So he's the one who first coined that term Cold War. When we think of another term, I'm just going to cover it now because we'll be covering it in the next couple of days, Iron Curtain. So interestingly, that was used as a metaphor in the 1800s, and it had nothing to do with the USSR. But when Churchill used it in 1946 in a speech, he said it's like an iron curtain has descended kind of over Eastern Europe that's separating the East from the West, over those Eastern European states, that's creating an iron curtain on this continent of Europe and Asia between the USSR and the Western European nations. So Churchill, it's not the first time the term is used, but it really comes in our day to just be known as this time of the USSR taking these Eastern European countries and saying, you're now part of the United Soviet Republic. And there being this invisible boundary now between East and West. So Churchill uses the term, it becomes popular to be known as just this Cold War time period, but it had been used before that for other things. All right, I am going to share my screen and you're going to fill out this Berlin blockade. So if you want to grab this sheet, I'm going to make some highlighting points, and there are a couple of questions we're going to answer together as we look at this. let me just see. Okay, can you see these maps on the screen share? No? Okay. Hmm. Okay, let's, you've got most of those maps with you and you've got the article. So we're going to start with this first page that's got Stalin's picture on it. So when we look at the end of World War II, we're going to read some of this and I'm going to highlight it so you can just watch your page. World War II ended in Europe. We know that it ended in Europe before it ended with Japan. So it's called Victory in Europe, VE Day, May 8th, 1945. The Soviet and West, so US, British, and French troops were stretched across Germany. The Allies decided to divide the defeated Germany into 4 occupational zones. So they also decided to divide Berlin itself, the capital, into these 4 occupational zones. So we have Germany as a whole. So if you've got this map, I hope I did include this map. Can you have a peek to see? Do you have Germany after World War II, this one? Okay, so this is perfect because it shows you Berlin here, okay? So within the divided Germany, we have a divided, it's like a puzzle within a puzzle. We have a divided Berlin within the divided Germany. So in order for Germany to not be able to rise again like they did after World War I, the victors, which included the USSR, decided to divide it up, and that would be the way that they could monitor what is going on here. Because Berlin is so deep within the Soviet-controlled part of Germany, this is going to create some major problems for how do you support West Berlin. Have any of you read the book A Night Divided by Jennifer Nielsen? Joey, you have? I knew you had, Joey. Way to go. It is a great read. I just finished it because Katie Jane had told me it was about the Berlin Wall, and she's a great author for historical fiction. Awesome. So if you have a chance to read A Night Divided, it's historical fiction, it's not a biography, but it gives you a really good picture of what it would be like to be living in a city that's divided by this giant wall and barbed wire and like a river, kind of like a moat, in order to get over to the free or the west side.
And
Okay.
if you're interested in reading about the Napoleonic advances into Russia, read War and Peace. It's a great read. I highly recommend it to anybody.
What is it called, Joey?
War and Peace.
Oh, nice. Love
It's great.
it. Wow.
Only like 16,000 pages. Or,
Yeah.
sorry, 1,600. Not
Yeah,
16.
I was like, if that's the War and Peace I'm thinking about, that's a doorstop.
It's a great book.
Good, good for you. I'm impressed. Okay, so we have those 4 zones within Germany, and then we have those 4 zones within Berlin itself, which is buried deep within the Soviet-controlled part of Germany. So we can already be thinking, this sounds problematic. So the plan for Germany was that they would, the Allies and the USSR for their portions would control how quickly it would rebuild. And they really only wanted it to rebuild to about 50% of the strength that it had before World War II. So it kind of like its 1938 pinnacle, it really wanted Germany to only be about at 50% capacity because that would ensure that Germany wouldn't cause anyone problems. But as time went on, the United States and Britain and France realized that when Germany was weak within Europe, it really affected all of Europe in terms of supply, in terms of demand for goods, in terms of importing and exporting, that a weak Germany was not actually benefiting, a weak economy in Germany was not actually benefiting the rest of Europe or the rest of the world in the West. So then the United States decided we really want to help Germany, West Germany, rebuild more quickly and kind of come up to speed with the rest of the West. The USSR did not think that was a good idea because they thought you only want to rebuild Western Germany so that you can get at us. So you want to make all these roads and you want to improve their infrastructure, and that's going to make it easier for you to attack us in the USSR controlled part of Germany, which would then lead to the rest of the USSR if you look on your map. Okay, so Stalin, remember when we talk about demagogues and we talk about dictators, they are usually known for being a little bit paranoid and a little bit watch your back. So he did not like the thought of Germany getting stronger on the western side of Germany because, again, he thought you're just looking for a way to attack. And so there's this posturing between President Truman in the United States and Stalin in the USSR. And that's what really begins this Cold War, is a rejection by Stalin of the plan to make Germany better, to get it up to speed with the rest of the world. Stalin didn't want that. Stalin wanted that swath of Germany that he controlled to be a buffer between he and the West. So he did not want Germany getting stronger. So that is the answer to your first question beside the pictures of Stalin and Truman. What did Stalin want Germany to be for Russia? He really just wanted it to be a buffer. He wanted it to be a buffer between he and the West, or between Russia and the West. What did Stalin think Americans, or America, that should read America, was really trying to do by rebuild Germany? And that was infiltrate Russia through Germany. Okay, he really just thought this is a clever scheme. Ooh, we're gonna lose our connection in a minute. So I'm gonna stop it and you guys can just rejoin, okay? So see you in a flash.